When I was younger, my dream was to play in this tournament. Obviously, in StarCraft history, Koreans were always the most dominant. But the reality is, especially in the early days, there were moments when foreign players were able to actually compete with the very best players. This was in about the first maybe 5 to 6 years of the game being out. There was also a time period where there were a lot of foreign players in Korea. I'll probably do another video covering that, but what I wanted to take a look at was WCG2003. This was the finals of Agogo versus Fisheye. Agogo, our Korean player, unexpected Korean player to actually make it this far into the tournament. There were other good Korean players that were more likely to actually take the whole thing. And Fisheye was, compared to the other foreigners that were playing, not as likely to get this deep. So it was a very different finals. It was very exciting to see. And let me just go right into these overlays here to show you guys. So, real quick here. This was in 2003. Now, just notice here on Liquipedia, look at how many tournaments there are for this year. These are Tier 1 tournaments, big prize pools, especially for esports back then, ranging between 10 to a little bit shy of 60K. Going back a little bit further here, we see 2002, 2001. These are a lot more sparse. There's nearly a tripling to quadrupling of tournaments as we get to 2003, and that continues on into 2004. So keep in mind that when it comes to StarCraft, this was a time when the multiplayer competitive scene was really taking off, about 5 years after the game came out. By then, it was already on TV in Korea. We had lots of big international leagues like WCG that were very established. That's what I grew up on and actually started my casting career out doing. There were also a lot of leagues happening in China, so it was a really exciting time. This is the journey to get here. So we had Fisheye, took out Ogre Daniel. You might not be familiar with him, but you certainly would be familiar with Elke and Gur getting this far. Elke, you know, a French player, at times the very best European, godlike Terran, and of course XDS Gur, the first Star League champion. We did another video on him that you can find on my channel as well. Went 2-1 against Gur to get to the finals against Agogo. Also note, on this side of the bracket, we had HOT Forever. He was also in the video we did earlier with XDS Gur. And he managed to be defeated by Hellghost, only to have Hellghost taken out by Gur. Hellghost, an amazing player from Brazil. I think if you're from South America and you're really big into StarCraft history, I'm sure you remember him. If you weren't diehard into foreign esports for StarCraft, you might not know. On the other side of the bracket, we have, by the way, this player named Control. I don't know who this is, but they ended up losing in the finals here. I'm sure they had an actual ID other than Control that they were using at the time. So it's Agogo versus Fisheye in the finals here. And I just want to point that out. Agogo is the unlikely player to get this deep. He wasn't really, having a background of being on pro teams, in winning tournaments, anything like that. So this was a bit of a dark horse here. And keep in mind, this is really when the Koreans were cementing their position as the best region in the world. Fisheye from Germany. This video, by the way, says he's from Poland. He's not. That's just somebody got that wrong when they put that in there. Fisheye later on became a very successful poker player. I'm going to skip just a little bit further ahead here. By the way, first map, actually before I skip ahead, Gorky Island. The maps back then were very, very strange. They were really experimenting with having high ground access to really crucial parts of your base. Places like your main, your natural. So it made for some very weird, sharp around the edges games that were honestly pretty punishing. One second, I gotta turn off my mix it up here too. Thank you. We got a hype train going on here, guys. Let me turn this off for a second so I keep doing this. Appreciate the support, guys. Thank you so much. If you guys want to keep subbing, you can. I'll turn Mix It Up on after we're done with this YouTube content. This has by far been my most challenging video to do live with you guys in here. Appreciate the subs. Thank you so much. We're going to get to tier 3 if you guys keep subbing. So, immediately... Oh, by the way, listen to this. Have you guys noticed this? English commentary.
Is going to be Gorky's Island. Fisheye
Who's that? That's not me. This is before I ever casted. Here's Fisheye. By the way, the outfits they made the players back then wear, Fisheye looks like he's on death row for killing somebody. He looks like he's about to go to the execution chair for murdering a 15-year-old girl. These brown outfits, it looks like prison attire. So there was a lot that they had to work on back then. Thank you for the subs, guys. I appreciate it. This is Wax Steven casting. If you guys remember Wax Steven, he was like the first guy that was casting international events. I think he did some other games. He worked under DJ Wheat with Radio ITG. Very nice guy. I got to cast with him a couple times in the past. I think I started casting a year or two after this. I guess WCG2005 is when I started.
And as he said it,
so if you guys don't mind, I'm going to turn this down just a little bit.
Not just be one of the best, he might be.
But honestly, if you go back and listen to this commentary, if you want to check out the original VOD, this is really good casting. He's not a StarCraft pro, but I think he does the game justice, which I really appreciate. So, yeah, to what I was going to say earlier, this is an island map. This is before they had really figured out, do we or do we not want island maps? They were still experimenting with them. By the way, playing on island maps back in the day, some of my happiest, funnest memories. I do think there's an argument and a case to be made that it is probably not viable in competitive Brood War in the modern day, and so they've experimented with semi-island maps. In fact, I think a year or two after this, we did have some more what you'd call semi-island maps. So it's like the whole rest of the map's connected, but you start out marooned on an island. On this map, it is Fisheye playing Protoss and Agogo playing Zerg. They're both spawning here at the bottom. For those of you who maybe have only been watching since ASL or just weren't that familiar with the ideas at play in the early days of StarCraft 1, Korean and foreign, the conclusion was originally that Protoss might be the strongest on the island maps. Corsairs are just very good anti-air units. I mean, they're basically, in some ways, stronger than Wraiths, stronger than Mutalisks when it comes to fighting head-to-head. And then, of course, shuttles combined with Reavers are very good. Now, I think a lot of the ideas later on changed to Protoss aren't the best on islands, but Zerg are the weakest, because I think Terran proved over time they had ideas that were also pretty strong and viable. And in some ways, you know, the units you could drop out of drop ships, like dropping 4 Goliaths in a drop ship, was a lot better than being able to drop in an island map situation, better than dropping 4 Zealots or 2 Dragoons or anything like that. So dropship play and island play for Terran got to be pretty strong as well. The fundamental issue that Zergs faced on island maps is that if they start out with only 1 base, they would have to upgrade drop to get a second base. And we all know that Zerg need more than 1 base to play any game that has any drawn-out amount of time where players are developing, they're macroing, they're tacking. And keep in mind, in order to get drop, you had to mine the gas, get the layer, put the drone in a very slow overlord, and then ferry it out of your base onto a safe place to expand. And so that could be very easily abused by Terran and Protoss, who are basically able to just set up shop right away on 1 base and start to abuse the Zerg. So this is already a tough spot. You can see Fisheye is going to go for double Stargate. So he's basically going to hard counter. His overlay is covering up the minimap. Yeah, you're right. Let me see if I can fix that. Stay with me, guys. Is that better? Let me see if I can do this.
From Fisheye, Spire about 75% finish there, as well as a second hatchery going up right now for.
Okay, we'll keep it like this. I didn't occur to me actually. Yeah, that does cover up the minimap. Sorry about that. Okay. So the first Corsair comes out. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Theater mode. Let's try that. Is that a little bit better? You know what I can also do? Let me lower my overlay here.
Nice overlord attack right now, using that Corsair to peg away at the overlord of Agogo. He's going to force Agogo to build.
So immediately you can see the Corsair is going to be abusing the overlord.
fast Corsair strategy coming from Fisheye. The Overlord is now obliterated.
So this was one of the big fundamental issues here, is that it was just so difficult to directly combat Corsairs while trying to get drop. Now, on Gorky Island, you actually have... this is the audience over here. You actually had an expansion above your base inside... it was almost like this was the center of the onion, if you want to put it like this, like a layers inside your base. The same was true, obviously, for the Protoss here. This was an idea of, like, maybe you expand upwards and further in. And this is, by the way, since then been thrown out as an idea for maps. Let me see if I can fix this Firefox overlay here. Okay, so we're going to move this to here for now. Is that okay? There, that way you guys can see. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, sorry, I'm doing all this live, obviously. Did he have to get dropped to get the drone there? Yes. And so, even though this map was, this map concept was difficult for Zergs to win on, they did have a play. And that was to try to clobber the Corsairs with Scourge, which I think we've all seen, you know, the Ogre Zerg Gamer meme from Cass, but to basically try to overpower it. The problem is situations like this, where the Scourge are coming in a staggered manner. Now you're dead. If you could accumulate enough Scourge and hide them, and then combo that in with Mutas, maybe you could overpower the Corsairs and do it. By the way, Germans in the audience, that was I believe, the German players from other games. Crazy moment here. Korea could lose. And, of course, even back then, that would have been a huge upset. As Korea, you know, this was already being put on TV. The volume of players that were good were massive. So Fisheye in this position backs up. He's only just now started his robo support bay. But the idea is you almost want to win that fight. And then Zerg is going to be so limited in tech and development from there. Now, that being said, Agogo does have a second base. I wouldn't say this game is over. And just so you guys know, because I don't know how much more of the map we're going to be seeing here, there's a lower level outside of this location that I think we're going to see the Corsairs fly over. That's on low ground that's basically ice. There's also expansions at 12, 6, 3, and 9. Did it make spores, Dandy? I see that mentioned in the chat. Honestly, if you make spores, you're going to get behind. That's one of the other problems.
And the rest of the map, possibly looking for any other expansions. We've got another.
When is the moment Koreans stopped watching StarCraft on TV and started watching on the internet, Africa TV? That's a good question. It probably happened while I was here. I think probably around basically the birth of streaming. You know, the tournament that I did, the Golden TV Avertech Intel Classic, and I can't remember the exact brands of the ones before that. TG Sambo Intel Classic, I think. That was for internet TV. I don't know how many Koreans watched it on the internet exclusively, but I think we all remember, you know, even if you're younger than me, the period where there was cable on, but then there was also stuff you could watch on the internet, and we're kind of at the moment now where very rarely do most people our age or younger watch things on the internet. So this is a bit of a stale moment in the game. Another problem with certain things about island maps, although this wasn't why they got rid of it, but an incredible amount of downtime in moments like this. You could see back then they still had the monitors with the big backs. And Agogo is basically roaming with Scourge. Fisheye's got a probe planted on here. So this was the idea of the semi-island map. A true island map would be something like Dire Straits, which I guess you have to be from the very early days to remember. Dire Straits not a balanced map, but a fun map. That was truly a map of little islands sitting in bodies of water. Into the game here, he actually drops the shuttle, so this is a bit of a screw-up here by a Fisheye. Now, he has one Reaver that's just going to try to dive in here and kill workers, and he gets a lot, which is wild. But kind of a sloppy game at this point in time. Not to take anything away from the players. Also, imagine being in this position, what is basically attempting to be the Olympics of gaming, with this much pressure on each side. Agogo cannot afford to lose. He got here in a series of surprises in comparison to like HOT Forever, who died out early on. So that was a bit of a win there. Agogo still has a shot. I believe at the bottom right side of the screen, I think it's being covered up slightly by my overlay, but this is where you can text who's going to win on your phone. There's a Korean number. See that over there at the bottom right? So that was still back when it's like, text us on your phone, let us know, or call in and vote, stuff like that. So as this game pans out, you know, the idea in all matchups would be that once you get onto this low ground area, then the ground game develops. What year is this? This is 2003. Korea versus Germany. Now, Agogo, by the way, he doesn't expand onto the main platform. He takes another starting location up here, and it looks like Fisheye wants to do the same thing, only he's not going to take the main base at the top left like Agogo is. He's going to take the smaller base. Whenever you take these smaller bases, especially in island map positions, they're easier to defend. It's harder to drop there. A couple cannons can kind of cover everything. You don't have to worry about stuff like Darkstorm. Here we go. Here comes that big moment. Now, this is where push comes to shove. Notice the Scourge are pretty grouped up. So if he were to be able to flick... By the way, they did not have Mutamicro back then. They, like we do now, they did not have the ability to like use Patrol to flick the Corsairs to do like a 180 and get a... like no scope the Scourge, so to speak. So basically you had to kind of let the armies collide in and do what micro you could. 2 armor, by the way, if I can see that correctly on that blurry screen. Again, sorry about the quality. This is just the quality that uploads were back then. Thank you for the raid, Travis. So Agogo's going to go for the Queen's Nest. Going down right now for Agogo. Trying to get the 3rd tier there of his hatchery. And, you know, at this point in time, nobody really wants to attack in. You know, PvZ on island maps, it becomes a little bit like the ZVZ Muta versus Muta situation, where once the fight starts, it will end the game one way or another. Quick shot of the stage there. WCG always, they never went for, like, the big effects on stage. Keep in mind they were rotating between different games all day. WCG would run between, I think, like 8 to 12 games in a given day. But I think budgeting-wise, they were pretty smart. They didn't, you know, go all out on crazy, you know, explosions and, you know, fireworks, smoke machines. They just kind of kept the bare bones stuff. Here we go. Now, notice the Scourge are staggered as they're coming in here, which means the Corsairs can now win that fight. This is pretty game-ending, by the way. I think Fisheye at this moment almost maybe a little bit too shy here with the fight. Now, the Muta spread's pretty good, but again, Corsairs on island map are kind of king. He does have like a really good spread on here. Does he actually win this fight? This is wild. Yeah, I feel like the Zerg shouldn't. I almost can't tell how many Corsairs are here. I guess, yeah, he barely wins. Look at that. But the hatchery is gone. So the Corsairs come in. He's able to chase the Mutas back. The Reaver can basically move uninhibited. Once the Muta count's been dropped, even if Mutas get over here, they can't kill a Reaver that fast. And so that's going to be a GG. Game 1 goes to Fisheye. I think, in either college or my last year of high school following this online. Someone in YouTube chat is asking, did they have the 11 Muta control group understood? I don't believe they did. No. But I'm not sure about that. I'd probably have to ask my brother. I wasn't playing Zerg back then. And even then, I don't really know when it kind of permeated into the foreign scene. Was it legal to use techniques that may not be known to other players during a tournament map? Yeah, I mean, why not? There's all sorts of techniques people are using. We're going to scoot it a little bit further ahead here. Okay. Sorry, you go a little bit further ahead here, chat. So this is going to be game 2. I cannot read this. I don't know if you can.
And we're getting ready now. And here we go. A go-go grabbing the top left location.
Okay, so this map, I remember hating this map. At this age, for me, I was playing or trying to qualify for WCG. My dream was to play in this tournament when I was younger. And this was a fairly controversial map. I can't remember the name of it, and I couldn't read it when we were loading it up. But Fisheye, as you can see, is playing Terran. So race picking was more common back then. I don't believe WCG enforced a lot of the Star League standard rules, and I don't even know exactly when the Star League standard rules came to be, but there was a point in time where you had to commit to a race in a tournament. Even to this day, some StarCraft 2 tournaments don't require you to do that, but the idea was that, okay, a lot of people would prefer to play Terran against Zerg, would prefer to play Zerg against Protoss, and would prefer to play Protoss against Terran. This was fairly common, and this created a dilemma in that circular problem where what if this guy wants to play, this guy won't play TVT, he'll play PVT, but if you choose Zerg, he'll go back to Terran, right? So the Star Leagues, a couple Star Leagues in, basically enforced a rule where you had to pick. If you were in a tournament that didn't, usually you had to just try to random select a race in the few seconds of the countdown. Obviously, this is not a great way to have stuff done. So on this map, we have Fisheye going for Terran, basically confident he can take a fight, TVZ. And people had a hard time dealing with Medic Marine back then. I think that you can win with Zerg, but it's a little bit... you had to really know how to surround stuff. You had to know how to micro lurkers, and I think people got very good at stimming and microing Marines very early on. So this is a map, you can see you don't have a ramp. You have this sort of, this like bridge that enters into your main. This is another thing that's basically not tournament standard anymore. Even on a map like Apocalypse now, it's a smaller entrance and they have the eggs on the side. Just so that if you want to wall in, you can. It creates more options. You can also see the expansions are kind of oddly set up. This was a very weird map. You basically had a big bridge that was elevated that went through the top down to the center. And then you had these low ground areas that you could expand into, some of which were accessible by siege tanks. Excuse me, some of which were accessible by siege tanks or guardians or other kind of siege weapons here. Now, for all the warts and zits that we could see on this map from the modern perspective, the ideas in the game weren't really as fleshed out, if that makes sense. Obviously, these guys are the greatest in the whole world at the game at the time, but we just know so much more, and there's so many more kind of little techniques and openers and things you can do to keep yourself safe here. By the way, 2 entrances on this map. I almost forgot about that. Oh my God, this map is horrible. There's a way to run around and get in their base there. So picking Terran here, Fisheye has to wall in both at the main entrance with his depot and his barracks and at the other entrance with the depot and the factory. Look at that keyboard, man. So this is actually a mech build. One base mech I don't know that we see it at all anymore, but you got to remember that in the early days of StarCraft, there was sort of this weird, I guess a good dilemma for the Terrans, but still a challenging one, which is like, are you supposed to go mech or are you supposed to go bio? Because mech seems to be good versus Protoss, but bio seems to be good versus Terran. Obviously, now we know it is mech versus Protoss, bio versus Zerg, but the reality is, like, we still see people go mech sometimes. We still see that Goliath build. We still see stuff like that versus Zerg. So this is a one-base mech build, maybe hoping the Zerg is anticipating bio. This is actually a build I used to run. I used to be able to play all the races at whatever primitive level of Brood War this was then, and this was a build I really liked. I would go for Vulture speed into Goliaths. You would run in with Vultures, shoot down all the drones, and then maybe follow it up with a Goliath push. Give me a second. I'm going to get another bottle of water. One sec. My streaming setup is right by my kitchen, so I can actually reach to my fridge from here. So he wants to push out, like, here and basically kill that. I think the Overlord actually spots the Vulture. I could be wrong. That's annoying, getting stuck behind the Marines. Oh, my eyes! No! They're, like, stuck!
A very good strategy, considering that Agogo went for the fast expo. Fisheye with the excellent scouting early on. There goes the armory soon and the academy.
So the armory is coming down and the academy. That's interesting. Now, imagine these had gotten here just a second or two sooner.
But the vultures for Fisheye being microed very well.
Now, in a moment like this, I think... Oh, I see. He can hit the drones from there. I think we all know it would have been probably would have been better to just kamikaze onto the drones and kill them versus try to stay behind the minerals. But again,
very nice defense on that push.
Very tricky.
Some members of the audience being filmed.
By the way, this was filmed in Korea. I feel like WCG was in Korea for like half the time, and then they'd have events overseas here and there.
Here come the vultures with upgraded speed. Fisheye making his way to the top.
Now, the reality is, if you invest in that many vultures... By the way, this is what everybody did with their hair back then. Everybody had, like, kind of gelled, spiky hair. That was the look. Korea, Europe, NA. That's what people were going for. So many frosted tips. That's right, chat. So, I mean, this is just Fisheye with a bad rally. Units are bleeding off. 90s boy band look. Yeah. So, I mean, at this point in time, the game's done. Notice that this is not the Mutas kind of zigzagging and gunning down like we see like Jaedong or all these other great Zergs do, Queen and everybody. Muta Micro didn't exist back then. It looks like the Mutas are stacked. I mean, maybe they're not even stacked as if there's an Overlord in them. But, I mean, this is game, basically. Fisheye attempts to cheese him out with mech. It backfires, and Agogo is going to win this game and tie this up. The Mutas were always one of the best units in the game. It's crazy that they got more powerful a year or two after this when people figured out how to micro them in a way that we just didn't know was possible. So, I don't know, man. I don't... There's not a lot else I can muse on about this. We know GG's coming. I'm going to let this run its course, guys. One thing about StarCraft back then, too, is people GG'd a lot later. They tried to slog it out. I don't blame them for doing that, by the way. I think we all had games where we kind of just didn't leave and something happened. So Fisheye looking very pensive here. Again, two unusual players to have in the finals. And Agogo repping, you know, all of Korea here in a moment where Korea had to prove itself as the best. I'm going to edge forward here. One sec, guys. We're going to jump ahead.
Korean team.
Okay, so here we go. This is the final map.
Are going to be
Tali of Jungle, I think, is the name of this map.
for the beginning of this match. And now we are underway. Fisheye in yellow, a go-go in the blue.
Now, I have to... I
Map's gonna be
don't
Tali of Jungle.
know if I remember this map, so just bear with me while I try to see if I can remember this.
Starting locations being in
You know, the maps, especially in WCG, I think even more so than some of the Star Leagues, were very experimental, very interesting.
basically
Increase the quality. Oh, the joke's on you, my friend. This is
of note
360p. This is literally as good as it is.
are the expansions that are enclosed by a wall of rock, a thin wall of rock, still able to be
So I'm listening to the caster. He says the expansions are closed off by a wall of rocks.
with some nice range siege.
And, you know, one of the things that was unfortunate just about WCG in general, looking at this is the last game. It was a best of 3. How criminal is that?
Gateway going down.
Not even a best of 5.
The Proton
Which, by the way, I always find best of 5s for StarCraft, even StarCraft 2, to be the better way to do a finals. I think you get the right amount of games in without drawing it out too much,
Another
still making it fair.
to note in this map is the bridges. There are 3 bridges leading to
So this appears to be a map where there's sort of a open area in the middle.
drop. Go through those
This map kind of more resembling a normal map, but you still have these kind of windy exits. By the way, see the ramp that we had back there maybe like 10 seconds ago? They didn't know how to reverse the ramps. So now in Brood War, you have a ramp that can go down from the high ground to the low ground that points up like that,
Fisheye just going to
which is just a better way to have a ramp. Before then, you could only have ramps that went from low ground to high ground, so you had to have these kind of snaking,
keyboard right now.
like a neck that would come like this. See that? That was the only way to make a ramp from the low ground to the high ground, which caused a real issue for map symmetry,
Try and cover the
and therefore caused an issue with map balance.
spawning pool almost completed for a go-go. About
So we go back to a PVZ here. This is on a ground map.
off and going.
And you guys will notice right away,
Looks like you have to scout for any fast
there's no fast expand here for the Protoss. Fast expand was like kind of a weird idea that was almost a little bit controversial.
possibly
Some players are doing it. Clearly, in the most important game in Fisheye's career, he's not. I believe he went for Gateway Gas.
more zealots making their way up to the
Gateway, okay, so Pylon, Gate, Pylon, probably Gas followed up by that. And so the idea was, you know, the idea with fast expand obviously is you know the position perfectly. You make a wall, you get a cannon, maybe you go for one gate and make the gateway part of the wall, try to do some pressure. That's the hyper modern way to play. And then you cover that with a base. Back then the expansions were so open,
try and get the probe out
you could not
as fast as you can.
wall off your entrance. So fast expanding wasn't an option on all maps. There were maps you could get away with it on. But then again, it was an idea of like, is this even the right way to play or not?
We're gonna have ourselves
So the idea from Fisheye, we'll see if he commits with this or not, but usually you run across the map, force them to make lings, and you come back. In this case, oh, and I should mention, I'm sorry.
for Fisheye.
There's an expansion in the back of your base. This is another idea. We saw this later on in StarCraft 2 used a lot too. So you have your main, which is in your high ground. So for the, you know, the people that are not that familiar with Brood War, but maybe vaguely, think of Fighting Spirit, but you had a low ground area inside your main with a base you could take. So if you controlled your ramp, you could expand there. So this build is making a lot more sense now to me. I was wondering why he didn't have gas. And again, apologies. This map is so old, and a lot of these maps are really only used for WCG, so my memory gets a little bit spotty. This is being recorded in the first month of 2024. It is, this game is from 2003.
Possibly to do a little bit more of feinting versus a go.
So,
Hydralisk then going
both
down
sides will be
for a
expanding.
go-go. Looks like he's taking
We're
a
seeing 2-hatch layer.
strat into consideration.
There were a lot of ways to play Zerg back then, just like there are now. Zerg's always been able to take advantage of ambiguity. By the way, if you look at where the probes or the drones are mining and how they return, it is egregious how bad some of the pathing is. They had not fixed the patches yet.
On the ramp right now
to where there was the proper mining distance for each of these things.
Overlord there to scout. Here come the probes for Fisheye's expansion. He's getting himself more minerals now.
So again, a bit of a slow game here.
And right now
It's a map where now this is funny. This was back when I think people thought this might be a good idea. The idea of just putting a pylon somewhere and blocking a base. Now this looks crazy. Back then, it was kind of innovative. There's something to the fact that because you have to do everything manually in StarCraft, just putting something in the way and making the player have to deal with that and have to kill that and have to send something over there to clean it up, that worked back then. Now you would go, "What are you insane? That's one of your first pylons." And you could see already Fisheye is going to be punished for this. So that's already a bit of a loss here. Keep in mind, this is a map where this is really where StarCraft was actually played. Most of StarCraft 1 was not played on your Gorky Island or whatever that map was that we saw before. What the name I can't remember. Maps more so looked like this. So this is really where the players are actually in their element here. And that was the other painful thing about a best of 3 when there was island maps involved in WCG is like, if your race isn't good versus island maps, then I guess I have to win. You have to win the other 2 games. You have to O2 on the other maps if you're going to take it. So lurkers are being teched up too, and there's a third base being taken. And you can see there's a cannon ready here. And this is, again, you don't really see games that look like this, right? A ramp, zealots there, cannons on the high ground. And I actually don't remember exactly how this looks, or how this game pans out. I did watch it a long time ago. I have not actually watched these games in preparing for this this video. It's more fun for me to kind of watch it with you guys, but it looks like we could see the start of a lurker contain. Oh, wow. Now look at that. That's brutal. Nothing you can do about that. I guess you probably could have some probes on some patches there, but that's brutal, man. What I was going to say was this looks like it would set up for a lurker contain here. Yeah. So, we even saw this in the last ASL. If you watch my stream, we encounter this maybe like 1 out of every 10 games, 1 out of every 15 games. Lurker contain has always been a thing. It's one of the early ideas that was played out in this matchup. It's also just, it's a very, how do I say this? If you play RTS games, this is a concept you'll come across. You don't ever attack into them because it doesn't make sense, but you do contain them. And you make them deal with your contain while you take the map. So Fisheye gets a DT out. And there are not overlords everywhere. So much open space, Dandy. Yeah, there is a lot. This map actually might even be bigger than maps that they have now. I feel like they made the maps a little bit smaller back now. There is truly an art to having the map the right size. StarCraft 2 had the same problem where the maps were too small originally. This is also just, production, getting camera shots of people as a DT's running. This is like the most important part of the game. They're like looking at the audience. Oh, I see a question on YouTube. Why are Korean girls always so embarrassed to be on camera? It's just a culture that celebrates, I think, shyness a little bit more. If you notice, I think Korea culturally has changed a bit since then. You'll see people that are not embarrassed to be on camera now, like they used to be. But Korea was very conservative back then.
Observer coming out right now from the robotics facility.
So he's got Overlord speed. The situation is kind of already laid out. Or I guess the problem's already laid out here for Protoss. He can't get out of his base. Mutas are now going to come into play. Oh, did he drop that there? How did those even get there?
Right now should easily be able to take care of these zealots.
Does he actually get the observer? That's pretty big.
The Zealots killing off the lurker, and
Oh, that's brutal.
just losing his lurker there with ease.
Look at how there's cannons kind of placed out like this. Now, from what we know now, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but at the time it was like, what are you going to do? So you can see so much of what's happening in these games is just because of the way the maps are shaped. It's why having proper maps is so important. So he drops 2 DTs in here, but there's already an Overlord, so it's fairly inconsequential.
One drone did get killed in that push. Not very successful for Fisheye, but you never know. Every little bit helps. Here come the Dragoons now for Fisheye. Fisheye trying to take on the Mutalisks.
So you can see at this point in time, things have teched really slowly. Is there even a gas? Yeah, there's not even a gas at this base. Oh, that's insane. There's not even a gas. Wait, am I seeing this correctly? That's a mineral-only base? In his natural? Yes. I didn't even realize until now. So this is a horribly imbalanced map. You know what's that's so funny? I just assumed there's a gas that was above the Nexus. There's no gas here, so Protoss can't win. This was that's crazy. I thought they had kind of figured this out by then, but I guess things kind of came along slowly with StarCraft. So this is before they knew that every map, natural expansion, you have to have a gas. A third base, you can have a mineral only, but you can't not have a gas because Zerg are actually too strong. Zerg can just make Zerglings and Hydras and basically beat a Protoss that has almost entirely Zealots and like 1 or 2 Templars. So we're kind of seeing Fisheye fizzle out here. It looks like we have a decent amount of time. So I don't know if those Windows sounds are showing up on your guys' end for the stream. Apologies for that. But things are fizzling out here for Fisheye. He's going to mine out his main pretty soon here. He doesn't have a lot of gateways. I think that's his 3rd or maybe 4th gateway being thrown down here. And Zerg already got to the position that the Zerg needed to be in here. And now the Lurker Contain is going to be set up. And keep in mind, a Lurker Contain at the low ground below a ramp versus only Zealots. How are you ever going to win that? I saw somebody earlier mention in chat, maps didn't become more balanced until they had maps like Luna. That's correct. And that was around the era when we saw players like Nada really get good and come up. That was when I think things moved from these kind of weird tactics around architecture and geography on the map and more to expanding, powering up behind that, getting another expansion, timing attack, focusing on upgrades, and having the next upgrade follow right up after the, having like +2 right after +1. And so, obviously Fisheye in a game where, look, this is the peak of his career. He's trying to do what he can to win here. It's going to be very tough. That being said, you can see there's problems here for Agogo as well. He probably should have had like 25 Lurkers out here, not 3 or 4. But it's Zealots and Dragoons, right? And we know, even back then, they knew you needed to have Templars in order to win a game. Okay, here we go. One of the coolest parts about watching Korean StarCraft when I was a kid was seeing that the audience really did understand the game. I would have a reaction watching it at home with my brother, and then it would they get a cut to the audience and they were seeing the same things that we were seeing, which was so cool. So this is going to be it. Ling, Muta, and Lurkers, if he decides to move them up, are going to be too good versus this. But, Fisheye had a really good run, and then you look at a map like this, and it's like, what else can you say? They did not have the map sorted out the way they needed to back then. And that's funny, because I thought in 2003 they still had island maps, but it had the ground maps kind of sorted out. But no, looking at a map like this, it's kind of crazy. Even if you go back to, like, a map like Lost Temple, which was considered like a balanced and fair map, it was actually not that well made. Compared to even a map like Fighting Spirit's probably a very good example of a safe, balanced, fair map. So at this point, there's just no way to recover. That's so many Zerglings and so many Lurkers. And there's really no way to get a third base here.
Who so far has been controlling this map very well. Fisheye now about to lose a pylon here to Agogo and his Lurkers, Lings and Mutalisks.
So Agogo has the whole map.
Again going up.
He's just able to make so many drones. Again, you can see that, like,
3 expansions.
even back then, with the top players in the world, the production was not quite there. And look at this. I mean, there's just...
For Fisheye, let's see how well he micros those High Templar and some Psystorm.
There's just no way he's going to get out of here. He's totally boned.
That is the much needed component in
By the way, when you're a caster and this happens, this is where you got to kind of figure out what you're going to talk about. I try to not say games are over too soon, but you know, when the writing's on the wall, but the player is still in the game because, I mean, they have every right to try to win or come back, or I don't know, maybe your opponent has a heart attack or something and you win anyways. Anything, you know. Try to run it and see what you can do. But yeah, from our perspective, we can see there's just no way that he can recover here. Hive tech's coming. And funnily enough, the Lurker Contain is still basically a strategy that is still stayed with us to this very day. It never became obsolete. You can see that Fisheye was able to, like, elevate her out a couple units. The problem is that on one gas, you can basically only make Dragoon Zealot. You can't get Templars. Dragoons can beat the Lurkers long term, but the Zerglings will beat the Dragoons. And if the Zealots come in to fight the Zerglings, then the Zerglings will just, you know, run back to the safety of the Lurkers. And this drop that we're going to see coming up here, this was the other way that it was oftentimes closed out. On maps without gas and on maps with gas, was you wait for just right when it seems like they're going to commit with everything to come out, and you drop into their main and kill all their infrastructure and end the game that way. And that's not so much a game-winning move as a game-ending move. So many old games end painfully slow like this. That is true. How much... Oh, sorry, Brand, I didn't see you earlier. How much did Protoss struggle versus Zerg in this era? Depended on the maps. This is a bad map. This is the final game for WCG 2003, but it's just... They didn't even have the resource distribution on a map set up correctly. So it was... It's funny to watch. I mean, you'll see this in tactical shooters as well, where it's like, oh, they didn't really make the maps right, or they didn't have every... You know, they had some ideas that were okay and others that were not. In this case, this is probably Fisheye's best bet, is to circumvent the contain. You can see the audience is pretty tense here. The Lurkers, if he engages with that, he loses, but what if he just runs around it? That's exactly what Fisheye is doing. I didn't realize this was going to happen. I thought he was going to run into a bunch of Lurkers and die.
Fisheye bringing more and more Zealots down. He's got a lot of them here.
Outcomes would have been much different if the maps were quote-unquote right. Yeah, sure, but I mean, the only way we can figure games... a game like StarCraft out is to have these different maps and see what the best players in the world can and can't do on them. Really good storm there. But the problem is economically he can't make what he needs here. How much more time do we have here? All right, it's going to end in a second. I know we already know the results here, but... and then there's actually a crazy thing I want to share with you guys once we're done with this video. A little bit of history that I didn't know. So he's going to try to blanket this area with storms, and he does a pretty good job. And so Ogogo's going to ditch this position. This does mean that Fisheye gets the third base up in the top left. That was another thing that was funny. Excuse me. About StarCraft maps back then, too, is the third base was oftentimes, like, really far away.
Let's see what Fisheye can do. Here come more Ultralisks right now.
But look, I mean, at this point in time, I would not be surprised if the Zerg is maxed out. Obviously, they didn't have the kind of observer settings we have now in Remastered, but generally speaking, closer games, PvZ, would be Adrenaline, Zerglings, and Ultralisks. We don't necessarily have that in some games today, although every once in a while I'll face somebody on ladder who does it. I still find that harder for me to play against, I guess because I'm not used to it. A lot of games now are still just mass lurker. So this should be the killing blow. I'll give you guys Wax Stevens commentary to close this out.
But it's not going to be enough. Fisheye trying to move back here, but he's about to lose some Archons. And a nice push by a Go-Go.
And so this was the win here.
And a Go-Go.
And there it is. I think that's going to be GG. A Go-Go wins it. He takes the whole thing. So, sad moment for Fisheye, who could have basically taken the throne there away from the Koreans. Weirdly enough, and by the way, if you're a fan of StarCraft, you might be thinking, you don't remember a Go-Go? That's because this was the only thing he ever won. He won this, and then this was an interesting piece of history that I found here. After taking second place in the Korean qualifier for WCG, losing to HOT Forever in the finals, Agogo made it to the finals of the actual 2003 WCG, where he faced German player Fisheye in a best-of-3, which he won 2-1. That's what we just saw. Agogo struggled to find a pro team to settle into. This is partially because his father, acting as his manager, had been demanding more money than Agogo was worth. It says citation needed here. Originally a member of Tuna SG, he left after falling out with management. He then joined Core, but soon left in June 2004 after accusations that he disrupted the team's chemistry. After failed negotiations with SK Telecom and Hexatron, Agogo signed with Samsung Khan in August of 2004. However, after an unimpressive run of games, he left the team and allowed his pro gaming license to expire. Now, this is where it gets crazy. On the 12th of March 2008, Agogo was arrested and charged on suspicion of theft. It was alleged that in September of 2006, a group of people, including Agogo, broke into an empty house and stole about $18,000 US worth of cameras and other equipment. And there is a Korea. I was going to have this translated. I don't have the. I guess on Firefox they don't have the same thing as Google Translate, but this article corroborates that. So I guess I don't know. I don't want to judge the guy, but it looks like he ended up unable to get along with his teammates and ended up getting in some legal trouble here and went to jail. So kind of a crazy story. On the other hand, you know, Fisheye went on to be an extremely successful poker player, made a lot of money, and you know, it's kind of crazy. You know, when you look back at you know, where people end up and you know, how far from grace they can fall. So crazy stuff. Obviously, an emotional moment for Agogo, a big win for Korea, but kind of a weird part of history there. So, anyways, thank you so much for joining me for that. I know some parts of those games can be a little bit long and exhausting to watch. They don't always end as quickly as a lot of the StarCraft games that we see now. Thank you for joining me for this. Let me know what you think about that. Please like and subscribe. If you want to join me on Twitch where I make this content live, you are welcome to do so. See this GL shirt? GLHF. You can get that at my merch shop, tastelessthreads.com, along with a bunch of other cool stuff. And hopefully I see you in another future video, whether it's a cast that I put on my YouTube, a history lesson like this one, or, I don't know, something with Stormgate, Zero Space, something like that. Have a good day. Bye-bye.